Focus on what you can control. This is a line that just absolutely rings in my head this week. For me, nourishing my family is top of mind. So we're baking, we're making, and we're serving up quick, cheap, and nourishing snacks while we talk a little bit about life. This week, emotions are high for our entire nation. Not only was it the anniversary of 9/11, but then we had the bus, the school, and Charlie. Calm in the chaos, a refuge in the storm. That is what home should be. So let's talk about it. My crew loves to snack, and when I was doing some research on what topics might be good for my audience, YouTube actually suggested that y'all might be interested in some delicious homemade snacks. So today, that's exactly what we're serving up. I asked my crew what their favorites were. We thought back to all of the things that we love when we go out to restaurants for appetizers, and we're turning them into one giant meal. So if you are interested in healthy, delicious, and quick snacks for your crew, make sure to hang out because I think you're gonna like what I have to share. I'll also tell you that all of the recipes will be down in the description for you to access at your convenience if you see something that you're interested in making. With all of that out of the way, I have some thoughts that I just cannot get out of my mind. And I have to say, this is one of the hardest videos that I have ever prepped for. I'm used to just coming and talking to you about what I'm making and what we're doing. And it just seems so hollow this week to do that, to sit here and to talk about snacks and to pretend like our whole nation isn't mourning in some way. Yes, I know there are people celebrating the tragedy that was the assassination of Charlie, but those same people are also mourning, at least I would assume so, what happened on the train in Charlotte or the school shooting or some other tragedy that's close to their heart or going on in their lives, even if they possibly don't know it. So I just want to say that from my home to yours, I'm not just praying for calm and peace for myself, but also for that same calm and peace to take over in the hearts of all of those in our nation right now and to turn down the temperature and make everybody realize that we need to stop and focus on what we can control. What I can control is what happens in my home, what's on my TV, what my kids are hearing, what they're learning, what they're studying. That is important to me, and it should be important to you as well. What ideologies are going into their minds? What is in their heart? Where is their heart? Do they know the Lord? These are the things that are important, that we as moms have more control over than we could even imagine, and that need to be the priority as we move through the coming days, the weeks, and even the years ahead. I have spent days considering what I want to say in this specific video, and I have torn up more scripts and more thoughts than I even want to wrap my head around. I have done everything I can all week long to keep my children away from the graphic images and even just the overall concept of what's going on. They didn't know who Charlie was. They didn't really have much access to any sort of media or any way of knowing what was going on. So in creating that calm in my home and that refuge in the storm, my goal was just to keep it all off. After they were in bed this week, I did spend some time online checking out opinions, thoughts, and what else going on. And last night I sat down to watch Erica Kirk address the nation. If you haven't seen that, I highly recommend it. She is an amazing woman, and if anybody can lead her family through this storm, it is her. But the fact is, she should not have to do it alone. And we should, as a nation, regardless of political stance, stand up against any sort of violence of this kind. I think the focus needs to be on raising kids who know that you can disagree without wanting somebody dead, that you can exchange ideas with people respectfully and have a dialogue that it just doesn't demand the end of a life. So if anything this week, it's making me double down on the time that I spend with my kids, the intentionality of what we say and how we say it, and practicing the art of disagreement. Now, while I've been chatting, I've obviously been showing you quite a few things. First, I started off with some sourdough pretzels. I did whip up that dough the night before, and let it ferment overnight. So when I woke up the next morning, it was ready to shape. So started off with those first thing in the morning to let them sit for 30 minutes and get a little bit puffy before we move on to the next step. What I'm making right now are what we called fruit roll-ups when I was a kid, currently known as fruit leathers, so we're not messing with the brand name. So if you ever see the name fruit leather and are wondering what it is, just know it's basically a fruit roll-up. Now, my kids don't typically get anything like that. We stay away from all food colorings and lots of processed sugar and all of those things. But it was something that I felt like would be a really easy addition to what we make at home, and also something that is really insanely quick and easy if you have a dehydrator. Now, yes, you can make it in the oven if you want, but we do have a dehydrator. So I am just smoothing this out on some silicone trays that go right on top of my dehydrator trays. I'm using apple butter that I made almost 2 years ago at this point. For some reason, it's just not what we grab, and it is absolutely delicious. It's just not really a staple that gets used much around our house. Over the past few months, I've had several recommendations on how to use it, but when it comes right down to it, I'm just usually using bananas if I'm making a bread or something of that kind. So the apple butter's just been hanging out. It occurred to me that instead of making an apple puree for this specific recipe, which I see all the time online, what if I just used the apple butter that I had already made? So instead of some long process of cutting up apples and boiling and doing all the things, all I needed to do was pop open my jars, get them out onto my trays, and smoothed out thin enough to where they would dry very evenly in my dehydrator. Now, one thing I will tell you, I started out with 2 jars or 2 pints. It wasn't enough for these 3 trays. So do make sure that you're getting enough for what you're wanting to do. The last thing you want is something so thin that when you go to peel it off the tray a little bit later, which I'll show you, that it actually just breaks and pulls apart. So the apple butter went into my dehydrator at 135 for the rest of the afternoon, and we checked it every couple hours. You do need to take your trays out and spin them around. I would go a quarter turn every time so that they're getting dried equally. I didn't do that at first, and the side closest to the back was definitely done way faster than the side closest to the door. So checking that rotation is always a really good idea. Or there might be some updates on dehydrators since I got mine a long time ago. I have a 10 tray Excalibur that I've had for years. It was actually something that I thrifted from another friend who was done with it. So I'm sure there are upgrades, like I said, but for mine, I do need to go ahead and give it a turn. I also found that the easiest way to get it spread evenly on the trays was just to kind of slap it on my countertop and help it slide all the way around, because when I would use a spatula, then I could kind of see those indentations, and I knew that that would impact the overall drying process. So that's why you see me tapping it on the counter here, and that is something that I would definitely recommend if you're going to do it. So we have 2 snacks already in process at this point, and it's time to head on outside and start working on the next. I'm going to harvest some peppers. We're going to make some homemade hummus and have the peppers with it here shortly. But while we're out here, do you notice that new awesome cover that I have installed in my garden? I was dealing with some major pest issues in this specific bed, and I had to take out a ton of what I had growing here. But as a result, I decided to get a hold of my friends at Vigo Garden and see if they had a cover that would work really, really well for this bed. And it turns out they do. So I want to thank my friends at Vigo Garden for being the sponsor of today's video and tell you a little bit about the mesh cover system that is going to protect my fall crops, not only from the bugs that are coming, but I'm also in the process now of ordering the frost cover that will protect it as we head into the fall season. In years past, I have used just the really cheap off Amazon covers that you can customize to the length and size of your space and hope the net doesn't get snagged on something on the ground. But that ended this last week. This Vigo cover system is made of a super strong mesh, and it's really easy to install. I had waited on getting one before because I needed one that I could install with my irrigation system, and this one does the trick. So after getting those poles placed vertically all around the same connector systems that are already in the bed, I just screwed the irrigation right back to the outside. And from there, the rest of it is maybe a 10-minute job to just click all of the pieces directly into place. Now, I was a little bit curious about how strong it would be, but since they're screwed into the sides, it is really amazingly strong. Another very very good use for this cover, especially in a week like this when we're back into the high 90s all week, is that it actually gives a 35% shade protection to your plant, so sun won't be damaging the little seedlings that I have growing in this specific bed right now. Now, if all of that wasn't enough to make you interested in covering up your beds in a new way, I have to tell you about how you access the inside of these beds. These covers are engineered in such a way that make getting inside so easy and accessible to everyone that it is really going to change the way we garden. So all you have to do is unzip the sides, flip them over the top, and you'll see a piece of Velcro where it will attach. So there is no more like fighting a long tool net, and there's no more worrying about how to get it back down or what's going to go on. The other added benefit is if you're just using it for shade protection, you can lift up both sides and let it be fully open in the interior, so you have the benefits of the sun protection without all of the cover on the inside. Now, if you're looking for frost protection as we head into the fall, make sure to check out their website as well, because I did mention an interchangeable frost cover that you can just pop right on top as the seasons change. If you're interested in anything gardening related, make sure to check out my link in the description and check out Vigo Garden, because right now they're having an awesome sale with up to 20% off everything you order. Thank you again to my friends at Vigo Garden for sponsoring today's video. And now let's grab those peppers that I've been growing all summer long and head back inside so we can move on to the next steps in this day. Now, thankfully, my peppers love the heat, so they've been doing quite well, while other things like the tomatoes have struggled a little bit over the last few weeks. But this is a snack that my kids would eat every day on repeat, even without the hummus that is so easy to put together. They will just snack on those peppers straight off the vine. I do have to remind them to make sure they wash them, but thankfully, I know they haven't been on a store shelf, in a cart, on a nasty conveyor belt, or anywhere else. So if they were to just bite one straight off of the plant, I'm more comfortable with that than I would be if they were purchased anywhere else. Now, just as a side note, these aren't something that I typically would all make the same exact day. So while you're seeing me move from one project to the next and back and forth, this is something that you can pick just one project and do over a weekend or any time that you have a little free time. It's not something that needs to take all day, and you'll actually see here shortly that I'm going to cut this off. I lost all of the good light because a storm started to move in. So I'm actually going to do this over 2 days, which is why you'll see a change in outfit and some other things going on here. But just a note, this isn't an all-day process. Now, while we were outside, the pretzels did have time to go ahead and rise, so they're ready for the next step. If you haven't ever made a pretzel, it's pretty similar to making a bagel. You do need to boil them, and I am using baking soda and some brown sugar in my water here to give them the right flavor and texture. And again, if you're looking for the specific recipe, do make sure to go ahead and check the link in the description. I'll also have any supplies that I've used during the process. So if you're looking for something specifically or just curious what I use in my kitchen and how I use it, make sure to go down there and you'll find everything that you're looking for. Now, as you can see, these pretzels turned out nice and cute. They are really, really delicious and a nice personal serving. They actually might be a little bit big for a personal serving for some of my kiddos, but if you're looking for an afternoon snack that's really going to fill you up, this is a good way to do it. These need to boil for 30 seconds on each side and then be pulled out and put on parchment. Now, after they do that, we're going to do an egg wash on top and sprinkle with salt. You could sprinkle with everything bagel or any other kind of topping of your choice. If you wanted to make it sweet and savory, you could add some cinnamon or cinnamon sugar, just however you want to customize it for your crew. But we're going to end up making a delicious cheese sauce to go along with it. So these are just going to be regular salted pretzels. My crew is almost more excited about the cheese dip normally when we're at the restaurant than anything else. So when I told them I was making pretzels, they were like, "Mom, we have to have a cheese sauce." I will say that's the value of keeping a stocked pantry. So if you have questions about that or you're interested in more details on how I stock my pantry, make sure to let me know down below, because all of these things are items that I was able to just pull off the shelves and mix up together. And I didn't have to run to the store for any special ingredients or anything needed to come along with this process whatsoever. Now, the total hands-on time with the pretzels is around 20 minutes, but that's including everything from mixing up the dough the night before to rolling it out this morning and now boiling, egg washing, and putting them in the oven. They take between 12 and 16 or 18 minutes to go ahead and finish off in the oven. So just keep your eyes on them until you like the color and the texture. I will also say, make sure you're putting them on the middle rack. The recipe does actually tell you that specifically, but I think it's important to manage that position of your rack because oftentimes lately, I've had mine down on the very bottom and I have baked a couple things down there just because it was already there. But I do that because I'm baking off a sourdough bowl and the other items don't generally appreciate being that low and close to the heat. And speaking of my sourdough bread routine, this is something that has really been a game changer for how we cook around the house. Last week, I went ahead and prepped 4 different loaves, put them in the refrigerator, and pulled them out each day as we needed them, and it worked out great. We didn't use them all just for bread along with dinner. Some turned into French toast. Others turned into croutons if it was still remaining from the night before. So a lot of different versatility. But the one thing that did was allow us to stretch our proteins way further, therefore spending less on the entire meal. This is one that I had in the refrigerator from this week. As you can see, when it's time to bake it off, if you've prepped them in the refrigerator earlier in the week, all you need to do is throw it out on some parchment paper, score the bread itself, and then put it into a preheated Dutch oven. Now mine is at 450 in the oven right now, again on the lowest rack, simply because I need room for my Dutch oven to take up the full space that is allowed in the oven. I like the Dutch oven because it locks in steam. You can definitely open bake. And as I said before, I am like no great baker by any means, but that just goes to show how simple and easy this can actually be. One thing I have noticed that is helpful is to add a couple ice cubes underneath the parchment, or I just slip them down beside the parchment after I slip it in. That allows steam to rise up inside your Dutch oven and helps it have a really nice oven spring, which most of the time is missing if you are not like an expert baker and know exactly what you're doing. I find that that little bit of steam in there is very beneficial. So make sure to use that trick if you're looking for a little more out of your loaves. Now, if you want to see exactly what my routine looks like and how I prep all of my bread for the week at one time, make sure to comment that down below because I will put that out if that's something of interest. But if you're just like, yeah, no, that's not for me, no problem at all. Or if you already have a routine that works for you, that's great too. I just am always interested in what you want to see as the viewer and not in taking up your time with something that wouldn't be of interest to you at all. So here I am just moving that parchment to the side and popping the ice cubes down inside before putting on the lid and shoving it back in the oven. You can see a little bit of steam rising there. I did get one in the wrong spot, so I had to correct that, but it's really nice to get it back in the oven. Another big secret is making sure your Dutch oven is heated up long enough. But aside from that, your bread will turn out beautiful. Now, this is the next morning, and when we went to bed, our fruit leathers weren't completely done in the middle. And you can tell that when they're like really sticky still. Of course, it's going to be a little bit tacky, but you do not want it to be sticky, or when you go to roll it up or chew on it or anything of the kind, it's just not going to be well preserved or easy to use. So I turned them down really low. I think mine goes down to like 90, just to allow them to go all night without concern. So if you are doing this in the oven, you won't be able to do that. But if you're doing it in the oven, you'll probably also have a little warmer temperature the whole way. So yours would probably be done a little bit in advance. The super cool thing about these is once they are done, all you have to do is slightly peel it from the edge and then give it a good roll toward the center, and you will have a very nice finished edge. Now, you don't have to roll it corner to corner. This does, of course, make the ends thinner. But what I found is that my littler kids can chew better when it's a little less thick. So I love to do it this way just to give a little more balance in how, or a little more option, I should say, in how much they're actually getting in every individual bite. Now, there are a couple different ways to cut them. You can use a pizza cutter if you want, but you will see I am using a much quicker trick than that in my opinion, which is just my good old kitchen scissors. Sadly for me, the hardest part of using my kitchen scissors is typically tracking them down and finding where my kids took them. I know when you homeschool, it feels like there are just scissors everywhere, and we have a ton of little kiddo scissors, but when they're into bigger projects, oftentimes they will come and swipe my good kitchen scissors. So tracking them down and giving them a good wash is the longest part. But when you cut them, it kind of pinches the ends together and makes it a nice little sealed off pocket in there, which is actually really nice. The kids really enjoyed them, and I just stored them in a mason jar. Now, I made these several days ago, and the last ones were finished up this morning, so this did last a while. But I will say my daughter's already asking when we can make more, so I am pretty sure this is going to come on a repeat, and the rest of the apple butter is not going to be around very long. The next item on the agenda is admittedly one that I just don't typically buy to have at my house, and this is a homemade Cheez-It. Or if we're avoiding brand names, we should probably call it a cheese cracker, but nonetheless, a Cheez-It. So all you need to do this is some sourdough discard. Now, this is the stuff that would typically be thrown away. So when you're talking about a cheap, quick, and easy snack, this one is top of the list. Now, it does involve some shredded cheese, and I do like to shred my own to avoid any of the extra fillers that come in or anti-caking agents to keep your cheese from sticking together when you're in the bag. But one thing that the recipe is very strict about is to make sure that you're using a very finely shredded piece of cheese because it helps to incorporate it better into the dough when you're making it. So if you're buying cheese for this process, I would look for one with as few anti-caking agents as possible. In other words, you don't want it to feel like there's a powder on it when you touch it. So if you've ever bought the wrong kind, you know exactly what I mean by that. For me here, I buy cheese in 5-pound blocks from Azure Standard, and we love, love, love the raw cheddar. It is just a family favorite. We use it for a ton of different applications. So I just put it on my box grater and shredded it into a finely shredded cheese right here at the house. And then the next step is just to pour in your sourdough starter. Now, I did mention before that this is discard. They did say if you have an active starter and you're wanting to make them, stir it down, get all the air out of it. You want this to be as thin as possible. And part of that is because you're going to pour it out on a baking sheet. So you're not looking for a thick, really active rising starter. You want something that is very pourable and is going to take the shape of whatever container you put it in. Now, I did go ahead and make a double batch. I should have put this on 2 trays, but I did go ahead and put it on 1. So it did take a little bit longer to bake, but just keep your eyes on it. You don't want them to be doughy, of course, when you pull them out and let them go, but you also don't want to let them go until they all look crispy because they will be really, really hard by the end. So I've done it over the years both ways. Make sure to pull them out before they're all the way crunchy. You do not want anybody to chip their tooth on a homemade cracker. So just make sure you keep your eye on it. Aside from the cheese and the sourdough starter, the only ingredients are some melted butter and salt. So this is one that you can whip together in no time and really is a beautiful snack, homemade and nutritious without the extra preservatives. So if you are a Cheez-It fan or your kids are a Cheez-It fan, just know it really does come together very, very quickly. The other thing I want to talk about just for a minute before I move on is sourdough starter itself. Now, this is something that I go through phases on. Like, I will be very into it, and then, like, I killed it and I don't have time. Now, did you actually kill it? Likely not. But I would recommend keeping it around, even if you don't want to bake bread, for something like discard items. Some of our favorite discard items are cast iron sourdough pizzas, crackers, whether they're cheese or not. I'm actually making both kinds today. I just didn't want to show you the process twice. In the next set, I'm making regular crackers, leaving out the cheese, but I added everything bagel seasoning to the top. So lots of versatility there with the crackers. But back to our favorite discard. It's crackers, sourdough pizzas, and pancakes. So anytime you need to throw together something really, really fast, even if your discard's been sitting in your refrigerator for weeks or even a month, to be able to pull it out and have something going and whipped up within minutes is a huge, huge gift to your family. And because the grains are fermented, it's easier to digest and breaks down really, really gently in this tummy. With just a sprinkle of salt on top, these crackers head over to the oven and you're gonna bake them for 10 minutes. Then you're gonna bring them out and score them. Now this is where the magic happens, so they say, or how you make it into a cracker instead of a big pan full of crunchiness. So I'm just taking my pizza cutter and running over it in both directions to create squares. And it is a little bit hard to get a pizza cutter all the way up to the edge. So if you notice mine, when I'm moving it here, it has a little bit of an edge cutter on top. I just flipped that over when I was going around the sides to make sure to get all the way up to the edge. If you don't have a pizza cutter like that, it's not a big deal. Just grab a knife and then you'll just have 2 utensils needed for the process. but you can make them as large or small as you want. Just know that they shrink up a little bit in the oven, so the smaller you make them, the quicker they're gonna bake. If you want a larger cracker to get done, it's gonna take just a little bit more time. Now, to give them the classic look of a cheese cracker, I pulled out a chopstick and went around to every single square and poked them in the middle. This serves a couple purposes. One, it lets any steam escape through the center and prevents them from being just a great big bubble on top. But two, it's what the kids are looking for when they think of this particular snack. So anytime I'm making something at home that has an in-store relational product that they know of, I try to go the extra mile to make it look as close as possible. While the crackers are finishing up in the oven, which will take around 20 minutes, just depending on size as well as your oven temp, oven rack position, and those kinds of things, we're gonna go ahead and make the hummus. Now, this is something that particularly if you're using canned garbanzo beans will take around 5 minutes to whip up. So if you are a hummus fan, but you have never went to the extent to make it at home, highly recommend trying it. I will say that having a nice food processor does help in the process and speeds it along quite a bit. It also helps to ensure that you're getting that really, really smooth texture. So the only ingredient that's hard when you're making a hummus at home is to make sure you have tahini. This is the classic ingredient that is part of the flavor, the texture, and all of it. So I would recommend buying that. I will link the one I use down below. I keep it in the refrigerator. I've had it for a long time. It is not past its due date by any means, but it had settled quite a bit. You want to make sure to really stir that in before you get started. And I did use my immersion blender on that just off camera to go ahead and get it mixed really nicely, because that impacts the creaminess or the overall product when you're done. Now, aside from the tahini, it's lemon juice, salt, olive oil, plus the garbanzo beans, of course. And I did go ahead and save out a little bit of the juice from the beans. You'll often see written aquafaba. Basically, they're just talking about the bean water. It's nothing specific or special that you need to buy. Or if you do dump it, you can just use water, and the recipe actually says that. So bean water is what I'm putting back in here. It just helps with the smoothness and the texture. And when you're doing something at this point, you're really just looking for the consistency that you want. If you don't add back in any moisture, it will often be a little bit thicker than will dip easily with a cracker. More like a paste than an actual dip. So just thin it to the texture of your choice and make sure you like the flavoring. If you want to add anything extra like garlic or crushed red peppers or whatever kind of hummus that you've seen in the store that you really like, you can add that into the process. Just make sure the added ingredient is prepared in a way that would be nice to dip, and go ahead and throw it right into your food processor during the mix and you're good to go. Now, depending on your personal preference, if you are ready to eat, you can go ahead and put this hummus directly on the table. But my crew, before we started making our own, was used to getting it at the stores. They're used to that really cold texture. And again, I want to recreate what they're used to at home. So I am dishing this up into a little glass storage container. I'm going to put it in the refrigerator for a couple hours before we're ready to eat, and go ahead and get a good chill on it so they can recreate what they're used to with the product that we made here at the house, preservative free, with all of the flavors that they're ready to eat. Now, while my everything bagel crackers are finishing up in the oven, I'm gonna go ahead and chop up all of the goods that we need to put out on our serving tray. So I have some peppers. You can see my tiny little assistant there. She was waving. She actually had a lot to say. She was talking specifically to the camera, as you can see here. Lots of chatter and lots of joy from her. And she was amazed when I told her that nobody that ever watches my videos actually hears what goes on in our kitchen. She couldn't quite understand why, but nonetheless, it's to save your ears, if I can be quite honest. There is a lot of chaos and chatter that goes on with 5 little kiddos. So now that I have my peppers chopped up straight into a bowl, I have a thing. I know it's really extra. It's not that big of a deal, but you eat with your eyes. And when you're doing something along this line with all the different snacks, I want to make it as beautiful as it is enjoyable to eat. So I am putting all of my peppers up on their end to make them gorgeous. And then I'm going to go ahead and cut up some extras that my kids really enjoy throughout the season. Now, this is a deer sausage. You can get a regular summer sausage from the store if you want. Every fall when my crew harvests deer, we get a lot, like the bulk of it, made into snack pieces like this, because we do have so much beef that we eat throughout the rest of the year. While it does cost extra to go ahead and have all of your deer made into sausages or sticks or something of that kind, I find that the flexibility over the year is just worth the extra expense. But not only that, it's so much cheaper than buying it all in the store, especially for the amount that we eat. This is something that we'll often throw in a cooler if we're going to the lake or to a sporting event or anything of the kind where we need an easy, quick protein hit for the crew. Now, along with the deer sausage, the hummus, and the cheese, I am going to go ahead and make a pretzel sauce, which I alluded to a little bit earlier. This is something that I haven't made before at home, but it's really not hard at all, especially when you're using something that lets you control the temperature as much as I can with this specific burner, which is why I brought it out. I didn't want to break the sauce and have it end up grainy, so I turned this burner down to 140 degrees to give it a very, very low temperature to really gently warm the milk and melt the cheese. Now, aside from that, I started with a little bit of butter, some flour, and I'm going to add some salt to go ahead and finish it off and make sure it's really nicely balanced. But the sauce itself comes together. I think the recipe says it's 5 minutes total, and I would completely believe that. That is what I did. And I also took the pretzels during this time because remember we baked them yesterday. Put them back in the oven at 400 degrees for 5 minutes to get them warm and delicious inside so we can recreate that restaurant experience right here at the house. Now, I started out today speaking to you about the heaviness that's going on in our world right now. And then I kind of told you all about just cooking and normal life. And that's what you can expect if you're new to my channel. That is my normal, typical content. I just didn't feel like I could do anyone a service by pretending that nothing changed, that nothing happened, and that there wasn't anything going on inside my mind. I feel like if nothing, I need to be honest with you guys, not just about, what's going on inside my home, but where my heart is. And this week, it's just been heavy. So taking a moment to get my crew around the table and sit and enjoy delicious food that we all love with all hands on deck and talking about the things that are bothering us, I find to be so, so important. You just can't underestimate the time spent, the bonding, and the communication around the family table. And I would ask that each of you really focus on finding some time with your crew, no matter how busy or how crazy your schedule is. The future is ours, and we're here to serve our families and our children. And that is my focus from here on out, and hopefully yours too. Thanks for stopping by, friends, and I'll see you back soon.